Well, thank you very much. I would say, though my university's in Leicester, I'm actually a West Ham fan, so I do have an incredible cross to bear at the moment. But thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and I'm going to go through some of the strengths and indeed some of the weaknesses of the elected mayor model. I'm sure many of you in the room will be aware of and indeed been arguing about some of the weaknesses. So I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on the strengths and the positive side. And in answer to the question, would Dublin be a happier city with an elected mayor, I'm going to give a resounding yes. And I will tell you why over the course of well, I'm not sure how long I'm speaking for. I'll talk until you get bored. So I'll stop now, shall I? I'm going to, I think it's about, well, and if you've got questions, just interrupt and we can take things from there. The other thing I would say is I'm leaning very much on our own experiences. So what I'm reflecting on here is the experiences, the way in which this model has been introduced and developed in England. And actually there are many criticisms of that model and many criticisms of the way in which it has been introduced and in the way in which it operates. And I'll go over some of those. Just a quick plug. I thought, while I got a captive audience, copies are available in the foyer. Actually, they're not, and that's my thought. I should have thought of that. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look at the whole issue of party politics in local government, because the question of elected mayors arose because problems or disenchantment has begun to develop with a whole notion of party politics in English local government in particular. Then I'm going to go over a few of the reasons why you might change to this system, some of the arguments about directly elected mayors, some of the issues about how we build new models of local government, and then just very quickly summarise some of the powers, responsibilities and functions that you might want to give to an elected mayor should you ever go down that route. These are very stark, bold, raw figures. There are something like 18,000 councillors across the whole of England. And on this table, I update this once a year, and our elections are in May, our local elections in May, so I update this once a year. Don't do it for by-elections, I'd be always updating the slide and doing nothing else. But you can see here the concentration of political parties. You can see the types of local authority within which they are strong, within which they are weak, and you can see at the moment the current raw figures of councillors. So at the moment we have an unusual situation where the governing party is still the major party in local government. Normally that flips. So we would expect over the next few years to see fewer and fewer Conservative councillors, more and more Labour, more and more Liberal Democrat, possibly more UKIP, and maybe a scattering more of Greens. So at the moment we're in an unusual set of circumstances, but of course what that indicates is that often in our local elections, when people go to vote, they're not voting on local issues. They are voting on national issues often, and they're voting for a national political party. Local politics tends to get squeezed out of our local politics, ironically. This is the raw figures. This is going to be unusual because this presentation has given me the opportunity to advertise all three of my books. I'm really grateful for that opportunity. So the main parties, as you can see there, currently in England, just over 90%, almost 91% of all councillors across the whole country come from one of the three main political parties. 91%. It's been 92. It's been up to 94 by now in the past. That's a stunning penetration of local politics. I think of local politics by national political parties. Stunning penetration, real power that our political national parties have over our local government. Consequently, that means that other small parties have a handful of seats by comparison, handful of seats. Most of the opposition to the main political parties are independents, what we would call true, proper independents, people who stand with the label independent. Out of this total here, there is, the vast majority are independent candidates. So all of the other national political parties we have, and there's something like 400 registered with the Electoral Commission, all of those 400 share something like 875 seats between them. Yeah. So very, very small choice there. Well, our electorate has choice, it simply chooses not to choose. So that's the contextual background. So why should we change? What's wrong with the town hall? I'm a great believer in, I like traditional local government. I like what I call proper town halls. I've got a web thing called hashtag that's what I call a town hall, for pictures of proper town halls that look like they should do, not the ones that look like multi-storey car parks. But local government in England particularly suffered from an image problem. It was held to be slow, it was held to be problematic, it wasn't responsive, it lacked transparency, it lacked clear, accountable, identifiable local political leaders. And that actually, there's some element, grains of truth in those sort of very, very broad criticisms. So we're faced with a choice. Do we continue with anonymous local government? Do we continue with very, very few people, I don't know if it's the same in this city or in Ireland, but very, very few people knowing who their local councillor is, let alone knowing who the leader of that council is, and all of our leaders, bar a few now, are executive politicians. They can take real decisions, make things happen. Or do we change things? And the recipe for shifting to this idea of a high profile or even a personality, which tends to worry a lot of politicians. We don't want our politicians, particularly our local politicians, to be personalities. We want people to make decisions about policies. Actually, you can do both. So the recipe is now, do we change our models of local leadership to go for accountable, high-profile individuals? Should there be a direct link to the voter for the person who has the top political job in the locality? And when there is, what do we do? Do we give them real power, or do we allow them just simply to influence, to use what I think somebody once called the mayoral office as a bully pulpit? Do we allow them to use it as a way of influencing people rather than having direct control, rather than the power of pushing a button, the power of influence, networking, building coalitions and alliances? You have a choice about that. How much of a mayor's role, how much of a civic leader's role should be external looking, and how much it should be internally looking at the management and running of the council, and indeed the internal party politicking of a council? How free are these mayors to look beyond their council chambers? And do they have a vision? Do candidates present a vision of the locality? One of the things about the office of council leader, certainly at home, is they don't have to present a vision for the authority. All they simply have to do is to get enough of their colleagues in their groups to vote for them. Those of you that are councillors here will know this. You know the intricacies of the party group. I've lived those intricacies as well. Sometimes for a political leader, it's quite nice to be freed from all of that and to be able to present a vision to your city or your area. So, visibility, big thing. Is your council leader the invisible man? Or do people know who that mayor is? Do they know them as an individual? Do they understand that they can approach that person and will have some sort of recognition of who they are? There's a survey from the Institute of Government, a proportion of residents who could correctly name the leader of their council. 85% of the people they surveyed said they could not name the leader of the council. They didn't know who was in charge of the locality. 8% of their respondents got it correct, and 7% had to go and got it incorrect, probably gave their own councillor's name if they knew it. Now, you might argue, does this matter? Well, would it matter if the people of the country didn't know who the Prime Minister was? I know there's a difference in power, but it matters that we know who our leaders are. How can we hold people to account if we don't know who they are? How can they claim some form of legitimacy if we don't know who they are? There's a small group of elected mayors in England who used to be council leaders. And the one thing that they will tell you to a person is they no longer go down to Sainsbury's on a Saturday afternoon and do a half-hour quick shop. Yeah? Every shop for an elected mayor is a big shop, but they don't do much shopping. Yeah? They are known, they are challengeable, they are public property in many respects. And again, the question is, do you think that matters? If I'm going to put over a reason why I think elected mayors are a good idea, this is it. I've taken Birmingham as an example. Okay? No particular reason other than it's pretty close to where I live, and it's the biggest traditional municipality council in the country. 120 councillors across the whole of Birmingham City. So to be the majority party on Birmingham City Council and to control that council, you only need 61 councillors. Yeah, you're in control. You take power, you take everything. So to become the leader of that municipality, of Birmingham City Council, you only need 32 councillors in your group to vote for you. Yeah, 32. But the electorate of Birmingham is 650,000 voters. The effective electorate for the political leader of Birmingham is 32 voters. Now you do the maths. Who do you want to choose? 30. I will, I will say a little bit more about this in a bit. But who do you want to choose? Who runs the place? 32 people meet in private, or 61 rather, or 650,000 people going through the democratic process. For councillors, I have to be honest, the answer to that question is often, we'd quite like the 61 people meeting in private to make the decision. Yeah. And I understand the reasons for that. I wanted to show you this because Birmingham had a referendum a little while ago on whether 2012, whether there should be a directly elected mayor or not. And it was one of those cities that was expected to vote yes and have a directly elected mayor. Biggest city, biggest municipality, biggest council in the country. Well, of course, there was a referendum campaign. All of the opinion polls were saying, yes, the people of Birmingham are going to vote for an elected mayor. I went to a public meeting. I was asked to go and speak at a public meeting during the campaign. And on the way in, the no campaigners, which were pretty much financed and run by local public sector trade unions, were handing out these leaflets. So I took one, and as you can see on the side where it says no, being an academic, I was waiting for the meeting to start, I marked it. Yeah, it gets something like 1.5 out of 10 for the issues that are right and for those that are wrong. And there are some real, there are some great ones here. I'll just pick them out at random. There's an old saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as regularly happens in America and Spain, who have high-profile mayors. Yeah? Fantastic knowledge that the people who put this leaflet together must have of 3,000 individual elected of mayors in the States. The interesting thing about this particular claim, of course, is not all American mayors are directly elected, and no Spanish mayors are directly elected. Spanish mayors head a party list. They are not directly elected. But never let the facts get in the way of a good piece of political campaigning. The elected mayor will travel the world, and you can guarantee it won't be economy class. Brummies, this is the nickname you probably know, it's the nickname of people from Birmingham, will pay the bills. The elected mayor in Leicester cancelled a business trip to China, which could have generated a huge amount of income because the local press made just that claim. And he cancelled that business trip, and as a consequence, Leicester has missed out on a considerable amount of potential investment. The elected mayor will be able to appoint unelected deputies and pay them large salaries without you having any say in the matter. Well, the last bit is sort of true, but the rest of it's utter nonsense. The salaries, as you know, of councillors and indeed mayors are set by independent panels, and then the council itself has to agree to that recommendation. The idea that mayors can set their own salaries, and it says it there, the mayor will be able to pay himself the same salary as the current chief executive, 200. Rubbish, nonsense, lie. Simply not the case. Yeah? I love this leaflet though, and the image here of the Blitz, this is where they really go to town. Brummies have always fought back against dictators. Don't elect one now. Because if you do, the elected mayor of Birmingham will knock on your door at 2 o'clock in the morning and drag you off to a re-education camp somewhere until you're convinced that you will always vote for him or her. And the imagery, the imagery of the Blitz and standing up against Hitler and the Germans, fantastic piece of, emotive propaganda. And they got the result they wanted. So Birmingham does not have an elected mayor. And as a council leader, who only needs to get 32 votes to hold his place. But that's what the people wanted. They were convinced by the arguments. I'm fine with that. Have a referendum, and if you lose, you lose, and if you win, you win. And maybe somebody should tell that to some people over in England. You have a referendum, and you go with the result. Just a reference to another issue we were dealing with recently. Okay, so just re-emphasise these figures. Combined authority, of Manchester now, we have these new entities called combined authorities where councils lump themselves together. They ask the government if they can operate within this framework of a combined authority because of the perceived benefits of scale. The government goes into a bit of argy-bargy with them, and mainly at the moment that's about whether these combined authorities will have mayors elected directly by the people or not. And then you have a choice. Yeah? So Manchester Combined Authority has an electorate coming up to 2 million voters. Yeah? Within and across the 10 constituent councils. So do those voters have a say in who runs that combined authority, which is not a traditional local authority by any manner of means at all? Or do 10 blokes, the current 10 council leaders, meet in the smoke-filled room and decide which one of them will govern? So it's even worse figures than Birmingham. With this, you only have to get 6 people to vote for you out of 2 million. Yeah? If you were proposing a system of democracy to any developing country in the world and said to them, well, why don't you let 6 people out of 2 million select who's going to be the political head, they'd laugh you off the streets. But there's serious arguments going on here about whether the mayor of these combined authorities should be elected or not. However, it is fair to say that in the referendums that we've had on directly elected mayors, the option has not really set the electorate alight with enthusiasm. And you can see from the figures there. May 2016, 52 referendums across the country. We have another one coming up in Guildford in October. Of those, 36 have said no. Since 2002, there have been 6 referendums on whether to continue with a mayoral system or not, and 3 have said yes and 3 have said no. But the interesting thing about this is when you look at the opinion polling data, in each of these areas, in all of these areas, the opinion polls normally show very, very strong support for directly elected mayors. And then there's a referendum campaign, yeah? And then it changes. So clearly, if you're worried about whether a referendum would give you a directly elected mayor in Dublin or not, the chances are probably not, given the nature of what we have experienced. But at least the people would have been asked, and at least those proponents and opponents of these two models, indirect and direct election, would have had to have justified the positions and the models of government that they're arguing for. I won't go over these in any real details. This is just to show you where we do have directly elected mayors, a sort of random sample with no real reason why some areas have said yes and other areas have said no. Collection of northeastern authorities have said yes, and 4 out of 32 London boroughs also have directly elected mayors, as well as the elected mayor of London, which is under an entirely different piece of legislation. Here are the results of the mayoral referendums that the government required the 10 major cities in England to have. Only one of those, Bristol, voted yes, and had in their first election elected an independent mayor who was subsequently lost in May of this year to a Labour candidate. So now Bristol has a Labour mayor.
Sorry, just one comment. Turnouts are pathetic.
They are. Yes. Yeah. Turnouts. These are referendums.
Don't talk about 6 councillors, representing our election or whatever. That is pathetic take-up, and that's a reflection on your councillors.
Well, these are referendum figures, not mayoral election figures. But you're absolutely right. When given the choice to whether to turn out in a referendum or not, people are choosing. Well, what we're seeing in many of these referendums are the same sorts of turnouts, and in some cases a little bit lower than the turnouts in our local elections. Our local election turnout is around about 30 to 32%. So some of these referendums reflect that, others are quite down on that. You're absolutely right. Composition, I just thought I'd show you this. Currently, 16 serving mayors. Labour has really taken the whole of these at the moment. When we had the first mayoral elections in 2002, 50% of all the mayors elected were independents. At the moment, Labour have really now sort of taken control, and it's an just indicative of where the mayors are actually based. The one Conservative is down in Torbay on the south coast. We have 2 independents. Currently, 25% of all of our elected mayors are women, and only 14%, more or less 15, of council leaders are women. The raw figures, however, that means there's only 4 women out of 16 directly elected mayors, but the percentages indicate something somewhat different, in terms of mayors. And North Tyneside is a really strange place. It's had mayoral by-elections. It's the mayoral swing seat, having had 3 Conservative and 2 Labour mayors. It's an interesting area there. So I'm just going to go over some. I'll jump over these particular slides because I'll get to the heart of the issue. I think. From my analysis of mayors in England, the problem is not too much power, the problem is not enough. And it's typical of the attitude that the central state has towards local government. Mayors and council leaders have broadly the same powers. You might argue then, well, what's all the fuss about? The fuss is about who chooses. The fuss is about who chooses. So when a council moves to an elected mayor, there's no new powers for that council, no new responsibilities or any new functions. So where we have district councils, and we do have a few district councils with elected mayors, they're in the same position in regard to the county council that they were before. So nothing in that sense changes. Mayors are restricted by appointment powers, very, very few powers of appointment other than the cabinet. in reality. And they haven't become, one of the things you would expect, and you hear this when you talk about American mayors in particular, but bearing in mind that not all of theirs are directly elected, you can mention the Mayor Davies, you can mention the Giulianis. Who was it who dealt with September the 11th? It wasn't the federal government, it was the mayor. Yeah? And the mayor covered in ash and dealing with who was at the centre of organisations when there was the London Underground bombings. Well, it wasn't the mayor of London. Yeah, it was the army, it was the police, it was the emergency services. Yeah. Real differences in what level of government is trusted to do things. They don't have an international profile. I'm not aware that any of our mayors went to the launch of the Parliament of Mayors last week in The Hague, I think it was. Great opposition amongst councillors. I'm very well aware of the arguments. I know what the vast majority of councillors think about the role of elected mayors. And they're bound by the constitutional status of local government in Britain, which is of a very subservient nature when it comes to central government. And so that lack of trust and that lack of power hinders them. I'm going to say, if this slide changes, which it's not for some reason. There we go. I would argue, if you're going to do this, do it properly. Yeah? Don't look at England and say, there's a model, why should you? Because we haven't got it right. Go for broke. Yeah? Comparison, if you look at a lot of overseas elected mayors, these are real political leaders. These are people that can make things happen for their localities. Yeah? They become the recognised face of the area, and they become firmly established as an organisational leader. The amount of times that councillors say to me, oh, the officers run this council, to which my response is, well, whose fault is that then? I've never heard a directly elected mayor say, oh, do you know the problem I've got? Officers run this council. Because they don't. Yeah? They become the organisational leader. So I'm just sort of playing with some ideas here and trying to, minimise the restrictions on mayors in our circumstances. Basically, what I think I'm arguing is, give them the powers to do the job. Design a model that reflects the real needs of Dublin City, that reflects the needs of government, reflects the needs of economic development, reflects what you need, and force your government centrally to agree to this. Yeah? Give mayors the ability to appoint boards and commissions to study particular issues involving councillors, obviously. I'm not saying councillors are excluded from any of this. Give them appointment and dismissal power. The one thing you see, I don't know if you ever watch these programs, a good example of this is actually the Ghostbusters film, yeah? Where the mayor of an American city goes into the police chief's office and says, there's your resignation, you're sacked. Yeah, I'm appointing somebody else. Or if you don't, 24 hours and I'll have your badge. Yeah, and those sorts of powers mean that all of those bodies outside of the council, which operate around you, often ignore you, often have different objectives, different policies, different resources, now are anchored into the city that they are also part of governing. I don't want to go through these too much. The slides are available, I guess, and you can have a look at the sorts of things I'm suggesting. But what I would suggest is, not only should mayors have powers of appointment internally over senior officers within the council, they should have it over external bodies too. Any new quangos that lack any democratic linkage or anchorage into civil society, the mayor should be there either heading that body or appointing the leaders and appointing the chairs of it. Same sort of thing. One of the things I've been arguing at home is we have these police and crime commissioners. You talk about turnout results. The first police and crime commissioner elections 4 years ago, 15% turnout. It's not a referendum. That's an electoral turnout. 15%. Now, it's slightly higher last time because they held them on the same day as the local elections, I think. So the turnout increased slightly. But don't hold back if you're going to adopt this model. And also, here's an opportunity to give locality some powers over the centre as well. Yeah? Make civil servants and departments sponsoring legislation, make them have a legitimate and legal responsibility to communicate with local government. There's a wonderful model in I think it's Denmark, where councils can challenge in a court, a constitutional court, legislation that affects local government. And if that court decides, or that process decides, then that legislation isn't passed. You know, there are ways in which you can start to strengthen the role of local government, but not forgetting, with all this power, there was a great political philosopher once said, with great power comes great responsibility. I think that was Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. Yeah? Great political philosophers of our time. Our mayors are only human. Despite the powers we give them, despite the responsibilities we give them, they are human, and there they are. It's a small sprinkling of ours. I'll just finish on this point. The really interesting, these are all political leaders. Yeah? These are all not just the mayors of their council, but the mayors of their boroughs and their areas. Yet they're all wearing the mayoral chain, which is very interesting. Yeah? They've all nicked the chain from the ceremonial mayor. And the reason for that, and each one of them has said to me, the reason I do that is when I go to certain places, people expect the mayor to wear a chain. And Robin Wells, the gentleman in the picture at the bottom, the biggest picture there, once left this £60,000 mayoral chain on a bus. Yeah? Fortunately, someone handed it in. So they are human. And the one thing I would say about the photo, my favourite photo of an elected mayor is the one with Robin. Newham is the borough I was a councillor in the mid-80s. Robin Wells, the elected mayor of Newham. Robin is a Scotsman with the surname Wells, standing behind the English flag on St George's Day with a rather fixed grin on his face. But who says we don't have a United Kingdom? Okay, thank you.
Taking on board what you're saying about the limited powers of English local government, it's actually less limited than in Ireland. But I'm just wondering to what extent, and it was interesting that it's the public service unions who are campaigning against directly elected mayors, was part of that motivated, whether consciously or unconsciously, by trying to stop the elected representatives getting too strong a role in local government, and has it had that effect?
I think they have taken a role. The union's taken a role in a lot of the campaigns. They've financed it, and they are invariably always campaigning for a no result. And the reason for that is often in Labour councils, particularly, the relationship between the unions and the council, and indeed the council leader, is quite a comfortable. I'm not saying cosy, but it's a good working relationship. The risk of having a directly elected mayor is you don't know who's going to win. That's the reality of it. It's why so many don't like it. And as I said, in the first round of mayoral elections, independents were winning in seats that you would never have dreamt them getting on the council. In fact, in Mansfield, an independent mayor won, and then eventually independents began to get elected to the council. So it's a focus of that. We had a referendum 2 years ago in somewhere called Copeland, which is up in the northwest. Big independent, I don't mean independent politician, but an independent campaign. The unions absolutely hammered into that campaign, but the result this time, unusually, was a yes vote. And I think that's why, is that when the relationship is good, any change in political model or system or methods of government could potentially undermine that relationship, and you could get somebody else winning, But I always argue that not liking the winner is not a reason to not have elections, because we'd stop we would have stopped having elections in the 1980s because Margaret Thatcher kept winning.